Hello, and welcome back to the Nourish to Thrive podcast, where I talk all things diet culture, intuitive eating, nutrition, and health without the obsession. I could not be more excited about this episode today, where I have my past client, Sarah, on with me, and we're going to be diving into some common struggles that I know so many of my listeners might be facing. And even if you are struggling with these things, but not fully aware that you're struggling with these things, or want to admit that these are an issue. Um, so if you even have like an inkling that you might be struggling with your relationship with food, your body image with exercise, this is definitely going to be for you. So definitely listen to the end and see if any of these things resonate with you. But before we get started, if you do like more episodes like this and want to support other women finding this podcast, it would mean the world for me to just please take like half a second to please leave a rating on this podcast. And if you have any kind words that you'd like to say, leaving a review for me is all I ask in return. But with that being said, I wanted to introduce Sarah, my past client, and have you just kind of tell us a little bit more about, you and what you were struggling with before, and we can kind of dive in from there.
Yeah, awesome. I'm so happy to be able to be here today. So I don't even know where to begin, but basically food has consumed me for over 10 years. It's probably close to 12 years at this point. So this past January, I actually decided to sign up for this mindset retreat because I was starting to feel a little bit lost in terms of being a new mom and my career and all that. So I went through during this retreat, so we went through these different exercises, and one of them at the end was like a card reading of sorts. So the card that I had pulled was actually called self-acceptance. And before I even read the card or like the meaning behind it or anything like that, I literally was just like flooded with tears because I knew at that point that that was why I was there that day. So all the ideals I had had for myself as far as my career path and my contentment in motherhood and all those things, I feel like they all came back to being able to accept myself first and really focusing on my recovery. And my mind was just feeling so exhausted by the end of every single day because I was trying to balance being a mom, being a wife, having a career, and on top of all that, managing my food and my body. And I just feel like I got to the point where I just felt like I had so many other things going on in my life and I couldn't really pay attention to them because I was so consumed and stressed over food and my body. And basically, after I left the retreat that weekend, I just had that instinct. I was like, something has got to change. I'm being called to do this. So I had followed Emily for a while on Instagram. I think like way back when, like to your like original days. And so I'd always like kind of poked around on your Instagram and things like that. So at that point, I was like, okay, I need to sign up for this program. Um, but just kind of like a little bit more of a backstory to my story. I was actually diagnosed with anorexia probably a couple of days like before my high school graduation. At that point, I was restricting a ton, over exercising. I was very underweight. And at that point, I was basically just put on a strict meal plan and I wasn't allowed to exercise until I was weight restored to my quote unquote healthy weight. And I was just going to weekly therapy appointments. And I feel like I got to a place where I was at a healthy weight and seemed to be okay. But ever since then, I feel like I would just go through seasons of ups and downs. And I went to a few different therapies over the years, and I feel like those just kind of helped put a band-aid on things, so to speak. But if I was to just look back on like the last 10 years of my life, I feel like I have missed out on so much. I missed out on moments with my kids. My creativity went to the back burner, and I missed out trying new restaurants, bonding with friends over food, just enjoying meals and different treats with my husband. I feel like my husband just got to the point where he would never ask me to go anywhere, just because he knew the answer was going to be no. And he did enjoy going places, but we didn't because I couldn't. And I just feel like over time I had just picked up on so many different dieting trends, which led to creation of a lot of different food rules. And I didn't really realize they were rules, until I was actually working with Emily. I was eating very low carb, tracking macros, feeling like every meal just had to be this picture perfect, thing and situation, just kind of eating on a schedule. I had zero hunger cues, at that point, and it was just kind of doing all the healthy things. And, I feel like that's fine for some to follow things like that. But with that, I wasn't allowing myself any freedom to get off track and just constantly thinking about food and what I was going to eat next and how was this food affecting my body if I did allow myself to have it. Um, when I did allow myself to have desserts or fun foods, I would kind of compensate for that by, not eating much before that. And I don't know, I just feel like in the back of my head for the last few years, I knew something just needed to change. And I feel like when I reached out to Emily first, I feel like I knew it wasn't healthy or right what I was doing. And but I also felt like I knew what I needed to do to recover, but like I just didn't have that push to get there. And I feel like I was just hindered by losing the control piece of things and just the fear of the unknown. I mean, I hadn't been able to trust my body around food for over 10 years. And at that point, you just become a robot, so to speak. And I just kind of held that belief that everything would spiral out of control and lead to bad consequences or whatever if I just let myself eat and lose that control. And I knew I could always go back to controlling my food and my weight when everything else in my life seemed a little bit out of control. So that's kind of where I was at the time that I reached out to Emily. So
Mhm. Well, I really appreciate you sharing, your story. And like, I know
yeah,
it's not always easy to talk about these
yeah,
things. It's a very vulnerable thing to talk about, but I so appreciate you being honest about that because I feel like, and you can obviously chime in as well. I feel like so many women, like, we all live under the influence of diet culture. And there comes a point where I think understanding what diet culture is kind of like really fuzzy these days because there's so much wellness culture that exists that I've had so many women tell me they didn't
mhm,
even know that what they were doing was like diety types of things. They didn't know that that was disordered until you like take the step back and you're like, well, do other people in my life do these things? Like, why am I doing these things? Like, why am I so rigid and perfectionistic and type A when it comes to food and exercise? And it's like there comes a point where a lot of these things that we think that we're doing under the guise of health
yep.
becomes that obsession.
Yep. And
And
that's like where I all started. I felt like I just literally started because I was like, oh, I just want to be healthy.
Mhm.
And you see everyone else doing all these things and you're like, oh, well, they're healthy, they're tracking their macros and they're following this diet and that diet. Everybody, has some sort of diet that you feel like, that seems like they're following. So I feel like at some point though, like certain people, I feel like they just like my personality, I just took that perfectionism with it and just took it to a whole new level, even though it kind of started out as like an innocent, you know, I'm just trying to be healthy and, you know, that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
for sure.
And I think a good way to even, I guess, elaborate on this, the way that I can think about it. So, like, we've all heard of the term like almond mom. It's like basically like this, I guess, point of view that a lot of like moms that we grew up with, like, we're on diets and like we're always eating less, like low calorie, low carb, all the things. And I think when you really think about how many women kind of do similar things of like, they order the salad because they don't want to eat carbs or there's just this like really negative like connotation around carbs and like just again
Yeah.
diet culture. So a lot of these beliefs that we see become so normalized to the point where it's like that's just normal, like that's unfortunately the norm, but that doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be the norm. And I think when the more that people, I guess, engage in these behaviors, this mindset, this mentality, other people start to develop that mentality. And so it's just like this like virus that spreads. If we were to like compared to something. It's something
Yeah,
that it's like when you focus on your relationship with food, how that's impacting you, you get to see how this probably is impacting so many other people, and like you get to be the change.
exactly. Exactly. And like, you see people like that all the time and you don't visualize that as like, oh, they're struggling too, but like there's other people that are just like in that spiral of, following these wellness diets and that kind of thing, and like, I don't want to continue the rest of my life worrying about, if I'm eating, the right amount of food or things like that. Like I feel like I have so much bigger things in life that I can be putting my effort and thoughts and desires towards. And I don't want to be 80 years old and thinking about that low carb diet that I missed out on, when I was 30. I want to be able to eat the cinnamon roll and, whatever, even though society now is like, oh my gosh, that's, too many carbs or too many sweets. And I just, you only live once. So I feel like I just got to that point where I just don't want to have to worry about that, when
Mm.
I'm 80 years old thinking back on my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good way to put things into perspective, having that like shift of like, is this something I want to be doing forever? Like, is this the mindset that I want to continue to live with? And like, I always talk about how recovery really is a mindset. It is a change in your belief system and how that's impacting your mental health in a positive way. Because it's not just about the act of like, oh, I'm eating a cinnamon roll one day, like I'm healed. It's like it
Yep.
doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, it really is something that you have to do the deeper inner work to get to. Um, but I did want to touch on the fact that because I know there's probably people listening that like think that because I'm not saying that low carb is healthy, that I'm probably thinking, or they're probably thinking that I'm promoting something that is unhealthy. But the reality is, guys, diet culture, a lot of these things that you have been taught to believe doesn't mean that that's healthy, doesn't mean that that's health. And I mean, as somebody who promotes longevity and health long term, like supporting our bodies, there are extremes. And we can't ignore the fact that there are extremes. And for somebody to go low carb, for example, or to just cut carbs from their diet, that doesn't make them healthy. That does not make them healthy because I actually would be more concerned about somebody's lab markers than I would just say, just go on this diet or like because somebody looks this way or eats this way, that means that they're healthy. Because I've actually worked with so many women who have gone on low carb diets and they are insulin resistant or they do have hormone issues. Their thyroid is completely downregulated. And it's like, just because somebody eats or looks a certain way doesn't mean that internally, like they are health.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I debunk a lot of this in my Nourish to Thrive coaching, but there is health that you can achieve without these extremes.
Exactly. And I feel like I learned so much through your course. And just like going back to the mindset versus, just like eat a cinnamon roll kind of thing. I feel like every program or every not program, but just like therapy and things that I went to previously, it was just like, okay, just eat this set meal plan and you gain weight and you're supposed to be healed. And I feel like that's what I went through for the first, 10 years or so of my recovery process. And 10 years later, it's didn't work. So I feel like there's just like a lot more deeper dive that you have to do to really understand, um, just like why am I thinking this way and what can I do to change my mindset on foods, just going back to like a piece of bread, like just like learning, about what that piece of bread does for your body versus what does a cinnamon roll do for your body, like it's not about just like eating all of the foods all the time, it's just about learning, more what those foods do for you and your mindset around them and honoring your cravings and that kind of thing. Like I would say like I feel 10 times more healthy now than I did following, a strict like low carb diet or whatever. Just mentally, like I feel like your mental health is just as important, as the physical food that you are putting in your body. And I
Mhm.
would, you know, rather feel mentally healthy than stress over, making sure I eat salad all day,
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And I did want to touch on because obviously the point of this podcast is to address like maybe some underlying signs of restriction that people might not be aware of. And I know Sarah, like when you first started with me, like we definitely talked about you obviously were aware of like so many things and so many behaviors that were going on for you. But I remember us starting to work together and like me starting to see like more of your patterns and behaviors, like the mindset shifts that were happening. I did see some things that obviously were like sneaky signs of restriction that you're like, I didn't really know I was doing that until like you brought that up. And so I'm trying to think of one, but do you feel like there was something in particular that you're like, I wasn't even aware that that was like restriction or like something that could have been like disordered.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things when I came to you, I was not eating breakfast until probably 11 o'clock most days. 11 o'clock. And I wake up at 5 a.m. and work out, hang out with my kids, bring my kids to school, get everybody ready, start work. And I was not eating any physical food in my body until 11 o'clock. And, you hear about intermittent fasting and all of these things, and but like when you're that active, like I feel like you need to be fueling your body a lot more. And I feel like that was like my biggest thing that I was like, oh, I'm trying to be healthy, like this is what people are doing now. So like why should I start eating at 8 a.m.? That's gonna make me eat 10 times more food throughout the day. So prolonging that time, when I was starting to eat, I felt like that was just like a subconscious way that I was thinking that I wasn't, I was kind of pushing all my food towards,
Mhm.
bedtime. And I'll never forget the one time you were like, yeah, literally asked me, you're like, well, why are you saving all your food like to go to sleep? Like you need energy throughout the day. So that's kind of like when that shift happened for me. Um, but yeah, I feel like that was like one of my biggest things is just
Mhm.
like not eating until 11, or, saving different like treats or fun foods just for the weekends. Kind of just like that cheap meal mentality, like you
Mhm.
don't really think about that being a form of restriction. But it really is, if you're not letting yourself have something that you're craving until Saturday once a week, that's definitely a form of restriction. And, but that's what the healthy thing to do is, you have one cheat meal a week. That's what's being promoted for the diet culture.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think that's a really good example. And I think there was one that I remember because I remember you're sending like the food logs and I remember I asked you, I was like, do you ever use condiments? Like, do you ever like, I think like it was like more of like the mixed dishes, like something that
Yes.
a big
Yep.
thing that I see a lot of women who struggle with just like disordered eating and like even just like food rules and having that history of tracking, like their meals are so like
Plain.
bland, kind of bland, but essentially it's very
Mhm.
simple. So it's
Yep.
like this is my carb, this is my protein, this is my fat. So I'm going to take like chicken, broccoli, rice,
Yep.
or like chicken, sweet potato, veggie, or like it just like very,
Yep.
very
Like
specific.
food plate. Yeah. Food
Very
pyramid. Yeah.
specific.
Hmm.
And yeah, I was like, if you using like condiments, you like, other like, and it is just like what you want to eat. And I remember a huge step that we took together was like branching out and like trying some foods that you haven't had in a long time, like trying mixed dishes,
Yep.
having somebody cook for you. Like these little things that we don't think of as an issue until the issue presents itself. So it's like, how do you feel if somebody cooks for you? Like, how do you feel? One day like adding I guess barbecue sauce to your chicken or like having somebody like add something to your meals or like cooking veggies in oil, like these little things that are so sneaky
Yep.
that you might not
Like I didn't even
notice.
realize that until you said that,
Yeah.
like it's just those things that like I feel like I had just like started doing over time and I was like, oh no, this is just my healthy, little meal, not realizing that's like not normal at all, and like definitely restrictive because you're not including oils or anything like that, all the stuff that makes your food taste a lot better.
Mhm. And I mean, obviously, too, I'm not like the food police here. I'm just obviously an observer. I'm the coach. Like, and one thing that I think is important to understand here is like, there's nothing wrong with having simple meals. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with like having meals where it's lower in fat or whatever it may be. Like, nothing wrong with that. But when it's a pattern, when it's like a ritual, like I have to have this food, I have to have it this way, my way
Or
or the
else your world is
highway.
like wrecked. Yeah.
Yes, like it's the mentality behind it. It is like
Yeah.
the, I guess, fear that comes up from not having
Yeah.
something, or like,
Yes.
it's not normal to have fear if somebody adds something to your dish, or it's not normal to have fear around somebody cooking for you or going out to eat. There's a difference. And I think that's kind of
Yeah.
like the biggest thing to look out for yourself is like, how do I feel if my eating routine is thrown off, or like I can't have this certain food one day? Does it feel like my entire day is turned around if a meal's not quote unquote perfect?
Yep.
Or am I able to just eat and move on?
Yep. Yep. And I feel like that was my biggest thing is that I feel like my whole day would just be thrown away, and like I could not focus on anything else if something like that came up, or like if an unexpected um, you know, somebody asked to go out to eat, or something like that. Like I literally would feel like paralyzed because I was like, oh no, like I had already planned out my day and like this is what I'm having. It has to be XYZ, this perfect plan. Like, if my husband has to go to dinner, I'm like, nope, like I have already planned my day. But like tomorrow, if I know that we're going to dinner, I can, I would probably likely restrict previously so I could plan for going out to dinner. So like definitely like the additions of like not the plain foods, like that was like something that was just like so paralyzing to me. And to your point, like that's when there's an issue there. Like you said, there's nothing wrong with eating these plain foods, but like if you literally feel so like anxious and stressed out over having something different, then that is where, you really know that there's a problem there.
Hmm. And I remember feeling so happy when you would send me like your wins, like I didn't measure up my peanut butter today, or like I
Oh my
didn't
gosh,
like.
that was like my biggest thing, like, is the peanut butter. I would literally, I could not eat peanut butter without knowing exactly butter I was eating. And I feel like when working with you, we started working through just like not counting calories and macros and that kind of thing. I feel like I started taking like baby steps on cutting out using the scale. And that was like one of my biggest things I feel like too when I came to you is that I have a young daughter. She's almost 3 now, so obviously she doesn't like fully understand everything, but she's starting to. And I just did not want her to see me using a scale or anything like that for every meal. And so obviously that's like a hard thing for me to have to cut out. But peanut butter was like one of my biggest challenges when working with you. And I will say the last few months, I have not tracked peanut butter one time. I can eat it freely out of the jar, and literally that just like feels so freeing, like eating peanut butter
Mhm.
without having to measure it. That was like my biggest win, I feel like.
I love that. And like even just little things. Like I always say like the little things are the bigger things. I mean, come on,
Mhm.
like I
Yeah.
know for somebody who maybe doesn't struggle with food, like, oh, eating peanut butter out of the jar, like what's the big deal? But it's
Yeah,
like
it probably sounds so silly.
that's
No.
a big deal for somebody who had spent years tracking food. And like I know like little things like peanut butter and like even just like eating something out of the bag and not like
Yes,
pre-portioning it, like, and somebody listening to this who's like might be thinking, isn't that like healthy? Isn't that healthy to be like so portion controlled and like, what kind of like glutton, just eats everything out of the jar? And like, we're not saying binge eat. I'm not saying
exactly.
to binge eat and like, just not
Not
have
eating
a
a
care in
whole
the
jar of
world.
peanut
Like,
butter.
there's such a difference. And I feel like the health space is so black and white when it comes to that because obviously we're not saying just forget about nutrition. And I think that's one thing that I help I guess my clients bridge that gap is like there comes a point where you can start caring about health and nutrition, but like when we're working on improving your relationship with food, it does require a lot of unlearning. There are these food rules that we have to unlearn. There is trust that we have to rebuild with your body before we can start even considering some of these other parts of like gentle nutrition. Because if we're so focused on gentle nutrition where we're not addressing the food rules and the fears behind letting it go, it's like it's going to keep you from being able to lean into that. Do you agree?
Exactly. Yeah, I definitely agree. And that was like, you know, yeah, one of my biggest things was just that the macro counting and, you have to get to that point where, you can trust your body and then lean into that gentle nutrition of, okay, I feel comfortable now, allowing myself to honor my cravings and eat, peanut butter freely. And then, we can start. It's not like I completely wrecked, like eating healthy every day, it's like just being able to honor those cravings when they come up and um, just, not stress over having chicken for every meal or vegetables and that kind of thing, just like actually eating what you want. And what I will say is like over time, when I was allowing myself to eat more just like of the things I was craving or I had restricted myself from previously, I was starting to crave more healthy things too. So like I was learning throughout this whole process that I thought the whole time that I was just gonna like lose control and eat, a whole sleeve of Oreos and everything, every day, but that's not the case. And, I feel like as I continued to let go of that control, that, your body's smart. It knows what it needs and it knows what, it tells you what you need. And I feel like over time, I was starting to learn that and know that I could trust my body and it would tell me what I needed when I needed it.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where I feel like that gentle nutrition piece comes back into play because like you said, we're not promoting to eat, everything under the sun, unhealthy, but your body's going to tell you what you need. And that point in my recovery, I needed to eat a few more cinnamon rolls and, maybe some cookies and all those things that I haven't let myself have for however many years. And then your body kind of resets that and you're like, okay, yeah, some broccoli sounds nice,
Yeah. No, I totally understand that too. And like I went through that as well. I always talk about
Yeah.
like my story and like I think one thing that can be really hard for people to like wrap their head around too, it's like when you are in the midst of it, like when you are dieting or you have an eating disorder, it's like all you want are the things that you tell yourself you can't have. And like that was the case for me. I'm like, how do people just like eat normal? Like, how do people freaking do that? Because like all I want to eat is literally like 5 tablespoons of peanut butter with every meal. Like all I want is sweet things. But, it does require your body to be in this state of, contentment, being at your natural set point weight, we're not restricting, we're not binging, we're just like in that gray area. And it
Yeah.
takes time. It can take months to get to that point. But I remember something that you mentioned, as we were working together is like all these little wins and like how your life was changing. Like I remember you saying like, I just randomly decided to go get like ice cream with my daughter and like you'd send me like pictures of it. It was like so sweet. I'm
Yep.
like, oh my gosh, like she's creating like those core memories with her.
Exactly. And it's like so sad that like I wasn't able to do that, previously at all. And just those little moments I feel like have added up to so much bigger. And I don't know, I feel like just like working with you, I have just been really able to establish my why. And that is being, my husband, my daughter, my son. I just wanted to be able to feel free and more flexible in my daily life and just enjoy activities with my family and not base those around food or when or what I was going to eat. And I just wanted my mind to just feel free and be able to be more present and not thinking about food all day long. And I didn't, like I said earlier, I didn't want my daughter to watch me weigh everything before I ate it. And I feel like when I first started working with you, I was still really in denial that a program like this was actually going to work for me. And I feel like even a few weeks in, um, I was I'm remembering one of our calls. It was like I feel like I was like a few weeks in and I was like feel like I was like just in tears because I felt like I was still struggling so much. And I don't know really when it happened, but I just remember one day I finally felt like I was just crossing the bridge to that other side. And I really attest that to all the tools that I was able to learn through your program and also the accountability I feel like has been like the biggest thing throughout the program. And, I had to put in the work. I feel like I had never put in any work to anything like this before, and it was so hard. But I'm not gonna lie. Some days I just wanted to say, forget it, but I didn't. And I'm very proud of myself for that. I know I couldn't let you down, and I couldn't let my husband down, couldn't let my daughter down, my son down, um, and obviously myself. I had committed, to the program and, I wanted to see that through. But now, I feel like I can do so many more things and not be held back by food, eating peanut butter freely out of the jar, sharing a treat with my daughter. This past weekend, we just went and got a cookie at the farmer's market and I had like two bites of it. And, I had a little bit of dessert later that evening, like something like that would have like completely wrecked my world. Just being able to eat like in a social setting and eating when I'm hungry, that is like my biggest thing too. Like I was following a schedule and just eating just basically like a robot of like whatever I had pre-planned. But now I feel like I can just eat when I'm actually hungry and honor my cravings. And I feel like I had been holding on to so much like mental hunger, and I just feel like it's so freeing to have actually been able to like honor those hunger cues and cravings. And it's just like insane how much mental hunger you end up having after restricting for 10 plus years. Um, but other than that, I feel like I have so much more energy. I'm not saving all my calories for the end of the day. I just overall feel so much happier and less stressed over food. And I feel like I've like started, I think I mentioned this in our check-in a few weeks ago. I've just started to feel like I've been like craving, adventure more, where previously I was just literally avoiding it like with a 10-foot pole. I was like, nope, do not come near me, adventure. But now I'm like, yeah, let's go do something, let's go get ice cream or whatever. And most of all, my husband, who has been with me from literally day one of my eating disorder, has noticed the shift I have made throughout this program. And I just think that says volumes about it and my progress and your help with me through this program for sure.
Oh, gonna make me cry. I was so happy. No, like I'm really glad to hear that. And I remember you saying like your husband was like really happy that you can like enjoy like pizza nights together and just like do
Yeah,
all these like fun things. And I just feel
yes.
like that's gonna affect your family dynamic so much better like in the future. And like you're gonna set that positive example for your kids. Like they're gonna
Yep.
grow up with a mom who like just has fun with food. Like, and honestly, like I feel like that's where like they create the most memories is like just like having those like special moments with you when they're young. Like I remember
Exactly.
for me personally, like I would grow up with my mom, we would just like make cookies together and like, she would allow me to eat the batter and just like there was no
Yep.
like good versus bad food talk and it was just like so positive. So I think
Exactly. And I feel like my daughter has already even, because I don't know if she's just getting to the point of like being able to communicate or what, but like even the times like that I've shared like a cookie or ice cream with her now, she's like, "Oh, like mommy's eating it too," like so like she's noticing that I'm starting to like eat with her, whereas previously, I would just give it to her and let her eat it. So like I feel like just her noticing that was just like, I don't know, just like warms my heart so much and knows that
Mhm.
that's like continually being like my why of like why I need to keep this up and, keep going with it because she's noticing for sure.
Mhm. I so appreciate you sharing this, and I so appreciate you
Yeah.
obviously coming on and like being an inspiration to other women and even like moms, new mamas, like old mamas, just like anybody who's has a family, because I think it really does to put things into perspective to even just like branch out and think about like, are the things that I'm doing only affecting me or is it affecting like my entire family? At the end of the day. Even if it feels like, I'm the only one that's like doing these things or like I'm the only one who's on a diet, and it's like, well, maybe there's another approach that you can take that's not so rooted in all these restrictions and these rules because, people do see what you do.
Exactly. Exactly. They notice. They definitely notice.
Yeah. Well, again, Sarah, thank you so much for being on here today. And I cannot wait to share this with others. For anybody listening, if you do resonate with this, I am going to be putting some things down in the show notes for you if you do resonate and you want to gain more support. But that is all for today. And I'll catch you guys in the next episode.